This is the Hotel Macdonald and its Edmonton Chateau on the river. Join me for 2 nights inside Grand Trunk Pacific's castle on the edge of the river valley, where I'll cover everything from a century-old riverboat cruise to the culinary experience to the natural beauty that surrounds the hotel. The Mac is Edmonton's Grand Railway Hotel and has stood as a symbol of elegance in the river valley for over a century. But to explain how my experience in 2024 came to be, we have to rewind back to 1910. The Grand Trunk Pacific Railway had just pierced through the prairies and west into Edmonton, and the first passenger train had arrived in town shortly after, but 1911 saw their biggest rival, the Canadian Pacific, break ground on a luxury hotel just 3 hours south in Calgary at the Palliser Hotel, which was actually the focus of episode 3 in this series if you missed it. So in response, Grand Trunk Pacific would construct a chateau-esque luxury hotel to bring travelers to the edge of the North Saskatchewan River Valley in Edmonton and onto the Rockies in Jasper. And construction would take about 4 years, and on July 5th of 1915, the Hotel Macdonald would open at a cost of $2.25 million. It was composed of smooth Indiana limestone, a high-pitched copper roof flanked by perpendicular wings and turret towers, and she truly was a masterpiece of her time, because when Grand Trunk Pacific built hotels, they didn't spare a single penny on anything. And this was actually one of 8 Grand Railway hotels that Grand Trunk Pacific's visionary Charles Melville Hayes had envisioned across Canada, but I'll touch more on that a bit later. Now, during the early years, the hotel was a hub for the city's elite, offering luxurious accommodations as a centerpiece of the Edmonton skyline. But financial hardships of World War I saw Grand Trunk Pacific go bankrupt and absorb into a new government crown corporation we know today called Canadian National Railways, or better known as CN, now making the Hotel Macdonald a CN-operated hotel. Now, only 700 meters away, in 1928, CN would open a brand new passenger station in the heart of downtown Edmonton, and it looked something like this. And the Alberta oil boom of 1947 saw Canadian National Railways begin construction on a 16-story wing addition to the Hotel Macdonald. And upon completion in 1953, it looked something like this. And the city of Edmonton would then give the nickname to the hotel the Mac, and the box that the Mac came in because, let's be honest, that addition looked really bad. And in 1963, Canadian National would demolish their passenger station again with plans for a larger-than-life tower that would symbolize their resurgence ahead in passenger rail service. And this tower would host passenger service arriving twice daily from Montreal, Winnipeg, west into the Rockies and Jasper, and arriving on the west coast in Vancouver. But despite the ambitious goals of the 70s, 1978 saw Canadian Pacific and Canadian National hand off all passenger service responsibilities to a new government-operated Via Rail Canada, while still retaining ownership of all their railway hotels. And 3 years later, in 1981, the Canadian government would cut northern service through Edmonton and Jasper in favor of southern service to Calgary and Banff, which did make sense at the time because 4 times the ridership went through Calgary than it did through Edmonton. But 1985 saw a new government come in, restore passenger service to Edmonton and the Rockies and Jasper, but fast forward to 1990, they would reduce northern service to Edmonton and Jasper from daily to 2 times a week, and cut southern passenger service to Calgary and Banff forever, which 34 years later has still not returned. Now, the Mac closed in 1983, and Canadian National would demolish the box in 1984. But in fear of the original chateau being demolished, the city of Edmonton designated the hotel a municipal heritage site in 1984, now preventing it from being touched at all. So in 1988, Canadian Pacific would purchase the hotel, and after a $28 million renovation, it would finally reopen in May of 1991. Now, 1998 saw Edmonton's passenger service relocated out of downtown Edmonton and over to Via Rail's new station, which, to be honest, resembles more of a bus shack than a station fit for Grand Trunk Pacific's vision of coast-to-coast luxury, officially marking the end of passenger rail service in the heart of Canada's most northern major city. And fast forward to today, where the old land where the tracks used to lie for passenger service is now the home of the Edmonton Oilers at Rogers Place. Now, 2000 saw Canadian Pacific Hotels merge with Fairmont Hotels, rebranding the Hotel Macdonald now as the Fairmont Hotel Macdonald. And fast forward to today, in June of 2024, as winter began to release its icy grip on Canada's most northern Grand Railway hotel, so did the countless renovations that the hotel underwent this winter. Which brings us to my experience here at the Hotel Macdonald in 2024. Now, I live in Vancouver, so Belle and I hopped in the car where we would begin to traverse the Rockies, where we experienced what felt like every type of weather in the first few hours of the trip, and we even saw a bear. Check this out. After that, we headed into the foothills of Alberta, and the destination tonight you'll recognize from episode 3 in this series. That destination was the Palliser Hotel. And like our 2-night stay here in March, it was absolutely flawless. I love this place so much. The next morning, our adventure would take us 3 hours north out of Calgary, across the prairies and into Alberta's capital, Edmonton. And this is where we will be calling home for the next 2 nights. Oh my God. Oh yeah, look at that. How awesome that is.
Oh my goodness.
This is the nicest Fairmont room we've stayed in to date. I mean, like, look at this. Now, one of the perks of having status with Fairmont is getting a welcome drink. So I had them deliver a nice hot pot of joe up to the room, and we were going to need it, because on the other side of the river valley lies the next adventure. This is the Edmonton Riverboat. Built in 1995 and a modern marvel in her own right, despite being the city's third riverboat and not the same one from this picture in 1920, this is an absolute must-do activity if you're in Edmonton. The journey starts by heading off down the North Saskatchewan River, leaving the Hotel Macdonald and the skyline behind, and also check out these wicked paddles powering the vessel. I thought this was so cool. And as the Edmonton skyline would begin to fade into the distance, the riverboat actually has some really great burgers and smokies, which, believe it or not, were probably the best food we had in our entire stay here in Edmonton, but more on that later. And the owner and captain were even nice enough to show me a look under the hood of the boat, and ultimately how they navigate the riverboat through the waters, because although the North Saskatchewan River runs from northern Manitoba through Edmonton and into the edge of the Rockies, today we're only going to the Alberta Legislature building and back. Overall, the staff are super friendly, super welcoming, the energy on board is outstanding, and if you're in Edmonton, I think you'd be absolutely nuts not to try this, especially if you're looking for a really romantic date night. But now a quick word from today's video sponsor, Magicspoon. We all remember the breakfast cereals we loved as kids that were loaded with sugar. Magicspoon turns that flavor up to level 10 without a single gram of sugar, 4 grams of carbs, and 13 grams of protein. Magicspoon is the protein-packed, keto-friendly breakfast cereal I've been indulging in for years. Whether it's breaking my daily fast at noon or a late-night snack before bed, Magicspoon offers me the nutrition I love without sacrificing an ounce of flavor. Flavor is the spice of life, and although they have loads of flavors and specialty drops, their original fruity is my absolute go-to favorite and has been since day one. And right now, you can get $5 off my favorite breakfast cereal when you click the first link in the video description and use the code TRAV. It's my name, TRAV, for $5 off my favorite cereal. And thanks again to Magicspoon for sponsoring today's video. After we would dock, we headed back to the Mac in preparation for dinner. Now, in the wintertime, it's indoor dining only, but summer is patio season, and weather permitting, it is the absolute spot to be. Now, I decided that tonight we would save the patio for breakfast tomorrow morning since the sunrise hits the valley so beautifully, and also the Confederation Lounge, as you see here, is absolutely stunning. The Confederation Lounge was named after the Fathers of Confederation when Canada was established in 1864, which is depicted by this painting in the background, and the man standing in the middle is Sir John A. Macdonald, Canada's first Prime Minister and the man that this hotel was named after. And although he championed the Canadian Pacific to build a coast-to-coast railway in 1885, the real visionary behind the Hotel Macdonald was Charles Melville Hayes. Hayes was a dreamer of his day. The Chateau Laurier in Ottawa, the Fort Garry in Winnipeg, and the Macdonald here were the only 3 Grand Railway hotels that his railway, the Grand Trunk Pacific, would complete, but Hayes actually had planned for 5 more, including the Chateau Capelle in Regina, the Chateau Myatt Springs outside Jasper, the Chateau Mount Robson on the doorstep of Mount Robson, and the Chateau Prince Rupert. Imagine the Royal York in Toronto, but on the edge of the Pacific in Prince Rupert. The Chateau Myatt Hot Springs was his answer to the Banff Springs because his hot springs were hotter, and the Chateau Mount Robson was his answer to the Chateau Lake Louise because Mount Robson was the tallest peak in the Canadian Rockies, and Prince Rupert was 48 hours closer to Asia than Canadian Pacific was in Vancouver for transporting passengers and freight. Hayes even drew up the blueprints for what would later be the Hotel Vancouver, completed by Canadian National and Canadian Pacific in a joint adventure in 1939, which was actually the focus of episode 4 in this series. And considering how well built all of his hotels were, it's crazy to imagine what could have been here in Regina, Jasper, Mount Robson, and Prince Rupert, because they did break ground for all 4 of them in 1913, but never saw the completion of any of them, because on April 15th of 1912, Hayes was traveling from Europe across the North Atlantic after securing funding to complete his ocean-to-ocean railway and, more importantly, his network of railway hotels that he had envisioned to transform Canada's landscape. And Bruce Ismay, head of the White Star Line, had invited Hayes to travel back on his most luxurious ship to date to discuss a deal between the White Star Line and Grand Trunk Pacific to bring passengers from Europe to Canada and Prince Rupert over to Asia. And that ocean liner was the Titanic. And at 2 a.m. on April 15th, Hayes would perish in the icy North Atlantic waters and never see his ocean-to-ocean railway or luxury hotels with a vision for a better Canada completed. And although we'll never know what could have been, what we do know is that along the river valley in Edmonton, the Hotel Macdonald was as far west as Grand Trunk Pacific made it before going bankrupt and absorbing the Canadian National Railways in 1920. And I think that's the coolest part of these Grand Railway hotels. What could have been, and the history behind it and the stories that tied it all together. But there's plenty more stories for another time, including next week's episode at the Jasper Park Lodge. Now back in the lounge, Bella got this cotton candy skies drink, which I thought was so funky the way they presented it. And then for dinner, I got the Dos Tacos and a steak, which was incredibly well seasoned, and Bella got the chicken burger with a side salad. But to be honest, it wasn't great. Her chicken was burnt and pretty dry, and the salad had definitely seen better days. Now for dessert, I had my eyes locked on the Perry's breast, but because Bella's chicken sandwich and salad were less than expected, they ended up giving us a complimentary dessert in the house, which was the Perry's breast, which again, I was going to order it regardless. But disappointingly enough, it did not look quite what I expected from the Instagram photo that I saw earlier in the day that sold me on ordering it. And all in all, it just tasted like it was slapped together last minute. But hoping that dinner was a bit of a fluke, we would head to the harvest room the next morning for breakfast on the patio, and we started things off with a nice hot cup of joe. Bella opted for the hotel's signature eggs benny with a side of fruit. I did the harvest breakfast with 2 eggs, sausage, potatoes, and sourdough toast. Overall, it was okay. The food wasn't overly warm, and it did take quite a bit for it to come. I don't think that the breakfast was worth $100 to say the least, but our hotel reservation did come included with breakfast, so it's all good in my books. Now dinner later that night and breakfast the following morning was pretty much the same from previous. I got a bowl of lettuce with minimal toppings, seasonings, and just a touch of chicken. Bella's salmon was pretty much the same. It seemed like everything was lacking salt and any seasoning at all here outside of my steak from the night before. And I think the guests will only come to your restaurant if you're able to offer something that they just can't get at home. And although the jumbo prawns and the espresso martini for dessert were absolutely fantastic, I can confidently say that I'd be able to make all of these dishes better myself at home, which, to be honest, was really disappointing because just down the road in Calgary at the Palliser Hotel, there's not been a single bite that I didn't absolutely love, and everything top to bottom was flawless over there. And as well as the rest of the meals that we've had at all the other Fairmont hotels in this journey so far. So I hope the Hotel Macdonald can see this and improve on that, because I really wanted to love the hotel, and especially their culinary experience. I'm a foodie. Although the dining experience here was less than what you expect from a 4-star hotel, you do come here though for the location. The river valley is incredibly peaceful, and whether it's taking your corgi for a morning walk or just sitting in the grass taking in the sunshine, it's one of those places where you can truly find peace in, and I absolutely fell in love with. And right on schedule, after we headed back upstairs, it started hailing outside, which was kind of odd for happening in June, but this does happen from time to time in the prairies. I mean, I'm born in Winnipeg, which Edmonton is basically Winnipeg with oil money. And with the hail coming down outside, we headed down to the gym inside. And I gotta say, they got a fantastic selection of equipment, and this might actually be the biggest hotel gym I have ever seen. And after that, we would head to the pool in anticipation.
You know what time it is. Cannonball!
Now, yes, the culinary experience didn't quite justify the cost by any means. I mean, $40 for lettuce with minimal seasoning, a bland dressing, and a few chicken strips was pretty disappointing. But the newly renovated rooms were absolutely beautiful, and I've said this a dozen times already. The river valley is why this location is so appealing, and why I think everybody should experience an integral piece of Canadian history here at the Hotel Macdonald. Now the next morning we got an amazing sunrise, and although a 4 a.m. wake-up call is tough, especially with it being up north and the sun rising earlier, it's worth every second. And after that, we'd order a little bit of room service coffee as we would pack up and head out to Edmonton, leaving the Mac behind and heading 8 hours across the prairies into the start of the Rockies near the Saskatchewan River crossing towards Revelstoke for the night, before we would complete our journey back home to Vancouver in preparation for the final episode in this series at the Grand Railway Hotels of Canada next week at the Jasper Park Lodge. I'm curious, have you ever stayed at the Hotel Macdonald? Have you worked there? Do you have an amazing story? I'd love to hear in the comment section below, because this series is my love letter to my country and my thank you to the brave men that put it all on the line to build a coast-to-coast railway, unite a nation, and establish the place that I call home, from the Fort Garry in Winnipeg to the Hotel Macdonald here in Edmonton, to the Palliser in Calgary, to the Bessborough in Saskatoon. Thank you so much for watching this series. I can't wait to see you next week for the finale at the Jasper Park Lodge, and I'll see you then.